March 4th, 1945, 30,000 feet above Tokyo Bay. Frost crystals form along the canopy as Major Ray S. Wetmore steadies his P-51 Mustang in thin, frozen air. Below him, the Pacific glimmers like hammered steel, streaked with black smoke from burning docks. Ahead, the first wave of B-29 Superfortresses, silver specks against the sunrise, closing in on the capital. The radio crackles. "Red lead to all Mustangs. Keep your interval tight. We've got company climbing out of Atsugi." Wetmore squints. Tiny shapes rise through the haze. Ki-84 Hayates and Ki-61 Tonys, Japan's last high-performance fighters. Their pilots know this is desperation. The Americans should have been too far away to escort bombers from the Marianas, but here they are, sleek, fast, and still with fuel to fight. Inside one of those Japanese cockpits, Lieutenant Kenji Arai can hardly believe his eyes. P-51s? Here? From Iwo Jima? He slams the throttle forward, engine screaming. But even in a dive, the distance barely closes. The Mustang rolls inverted, brakes left, and climbs like no aircraft he's ever seen. The two machines cross paths in a blur of sunlight and tracers, one born of desperation, the other of industrial might. As Arai pulls up through the smoke, he realizes something chilling. The Americans have erased distance itself. The long reach. Only months earlier, Japan's pilots still felt safe over their homeland. American raids had to fly from Saipan, Tinian, or Guam, more than 1,500 miles away, too far for fighter cover. The B-29s came alone, high and fast, but vulnerable once Japanese interceptors reached them. That illusion ended the day the U.S. Marines took Iwo Jima. After 36 days of hellish combat, the island's volcanic ash flats became runways, launching points for the new long-range P-51 Mustangs. With external fuel tanks slung under their wings, these fighters could escort superfortresses all the way to Tokyo, loiter overhead, and still return to base. The Mustang was more than a fighter. It was a bridge between the Pacific's scattered islands and Japan's once untouchable sky. The pilots who brought the fight home. The men who flew them came from squadrons like the 15th Fighter Group and the 506th Fighter Group, veterans of the Pacific and new arrivals from Europe. They had names that echoed through radio chatter: Charles or Chuck Yeager, Jack R. Ridgway, and John W. Mitchell. Some had faced the Luftwaffe. Now they faced the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force over its own cities. They flew the P-51 with its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin V1650-7, giving more than 1,600 horsepower. Sleek laminar flow wings reduced drag, while its bubble canopy offered unmatched visibility. At full throttle, it could top 440 miles per hour above 25,000 feet. But its true weapon wasn't speed or firepower. It was endurance. With twin drop tanks, the Mustang could fly over 1,600 miles round trip. For Japanese defenders, this rewrote the map of war. The ghosts from Iwo Jima. When the first Mustangs arrived at Iwo Jima in late February 1945, the airfield was still littered with wrecks and smoking craters. Seabees worked night and day to level the soft volcanic ash. Pilots slept in tents dug into the sand, eating cold rations and listening to sporadic sniper fire from surviving Japanese holdouts in the caves. Major Jim Tapp of the 78th Fighter Squadron recalled, "We flew out over the beach where Marines were still fighting. We could see tracer fire in the caves below while we were pre-flating." By March, the strip was operational. The first Mustangs launched alongside B-29s heading north, their silver fuselages shimmering over endless blue. That first mission, March 4, 1945, was a revelation. Japan's home defense squadron scrambled from bases at Chofu, Atsugi, and Narimasu. They expected lumbering bombers, not nimble fighters. Within minutes, the Mustangs were among them, slashing through formations, firing 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, leaving spiraling contrails and astonished survivors. For the first time, Japanese interceptors had nowhere to hide, not even above their own capital. The fear of the unseen. In mess halls and airfields across Honshu, pilots whispered of the new American plane that could appear without warning and chase them for miles. Some believed it was two-engined, others swore it had a jet. Reports conflicted because many never got close enough to identify it. Lieutenant Arai's comrade, Lieutenant Masato Yamaguchi, wrote in his diary 2 weeks before his death, "The enemy fighter follows like a hawk. Even if I dive, it grows larger. Its guns flash white. There is no escape." Within months, attrition among Japanese air defenders reached catastrophic levels. Fuel shortages grounded many squadrons. The few who took off faced swarms of Mustangs circling over airfields, ready to pounce the moment they climbed into view. By April 1945, the Mustangs had become ghosts in the sky, silent until it was too late. The turning point above Tokyo. On April 7, 1945, as Task Force 58's carrier plane struck the battleship Yamato at sea, the B-29s launched their own offensive over Tokyo. P-51s from the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups swept ahead, strafing airfields, rail yards, and military convoys. Japanese airfields that once filled the sky with interceptors now lay silent, their aircraft burning on the ground. In one mission alone, over 400 Japanese planes were destroyed or damaged, many without ever leaving their revetments. Major Wetmore, who would end the war an ace with 21 kills, later said, "They used to own the sky over their cities. By summer, we owned the sunrise." The end of the Empire's wings. By August 1945, Japan's aerial defense was shattered. The P-51s had done more than escort. They'd annihilated the means of resistance. Airfields cratered, fuel depots burned, training schools emptied. When the final B-29s flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, barely a fighter rose to meet them. The Mustang's roar was the sound of inevitability, of technology and logistics converging into dominance. Closing moment of Section 1. Night falls over Iwo Jima. Rows of Mustangs stand on pierced steel runways, their wings glinting under searchlights. Mechanics wipe oil from the Merlin engines, while pilots check weather charts for tomorrow's raid, Osaka, or maybe Nagoya. In the distance, the sea booms against the black volcanic shore. Major Wetmore looks east towards the faint glow on the horizon. Japan is only a few hours away now, and for the men who will fly there, the war feels close enough to touch. April 1940. Inglewood, California. The world was already burning, but America was not yet at war. Inside the assembly halls of North American Aviation, blueprints stretched across drafting tables, and the smell of machine oil filled the air. A British purchasing commission had just walked in with an urgent request. They needed fighters, fast. The Royal Air Force had been fighting for survival against the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitts and Heinkels. Their order was simple: build more P-40 Warhawks, But North America's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, saw a different opportunity. Instead of assembling someone else's design, he proposed a new one, faster, longer-ranged, and more aerodynamic than anything flying. "Give us 120 days," Kindleberger promised, "and we'll give you a fighter that can change this war." It was an audacious claim. Yet in less than 4 months, the NA-73X prototype, what would become the Mustang, took to the skies. It was sleek, almost predatory. Its laminar flow wing reduced drag by nearly half, and its radiator scoop, carefully positioned beneath the fuselage, doubled as a thrust generator. Even the test pilots called it un-American, too elegant, too European. But when they opened the throttle, the plane answered like a thoroughbred. Still, there was a problem: its engine. The birth of a legend. The first Mustangs used the Allison V1710, reliable but weak at high altitude. In 1941, British test pilots found that the Mustang handled beautifully below 15,000 feet, perfect for low-level recon, but gasped for breath above the clouds, where most air battles were fought. Then came the idea that would change everything: fit it with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. At the Rolls-Royce plant in Hucknall, England, engineers grafted the Merlin 61 into the Mustang's frame. The result stunned them all. Suddenly, the plane climbed like a Spitfire and outran everything in the sky. It wasn't just fast, it was efficient, burning less fuel than any comparable fighter. The British loved it instantly. The Americans took notice. By late 1942, North America's Inglewood and Dallas plants were roaring day and night, producing the improved P-51B and P-51C. They arrived in Europe at a moment when the U.S. 8th Air Force was suffering catastrophic bomber losses. Daylight raids deep into Germany without fighter escort were suicide runs. General Jimmy Doolittle, who had once led the audacious Tokyo raid in 1942, now commanded the 8th Air Force. He understood that without a long-range escort, strategic bombing was unsustainable. The Mustang would become his answer. Go with the bombers, stay with the bombers. Winter, 1943, England. The airfields of East Anglia were slick with frost. Mechanics warmed their hands on fuel drums while pilots ran their checklists. The first Mustangs to escort bombers across Germany were flown by men like Don Gentile, John Godfrey, and Leonard or Tit Carson, names that would soon be etched into aviation legend. On a typical mission, B-17s and B-24s from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Bomb Divisions lifted off before dawn, engines shaking the ground. They formed up over the channel, immense formations of silver specks that stretched for miles. German radar would spot them, and soon swarms of Messerschmitts, Bf-109s, and Focke-Wulf 119s would rise to meet them. Before the P-51, escorts could only accompany the bombers part way. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings had to turn back over the Rhineland, leaving the bombers alone during the deadliest stretch: Berlin, Leipzig, and Schweifern. Now, with P-51s fitted with 75-gallon drop tanks, the game changed. Go with the bombers, stay with the bombers, Doolittle told his fighter commanders. But if you see the Luftwaffe, go get them. And they did. The fall of the Luftwaffe. From early 1944 onward, the Luftwaffe's nightmare had a new shape: the shark-nosed Mustang with the yellow band of the 361st Fighter Group, or the checkered tail of the 357th. They flew higher, faster, and farther than anything Germany could scramble. On March 6, 1944, during the first raid on Berlin, Mustangs engaged hundreds of interceptors and stayed with the bombers all the way home. That single day marked a turning point. The Luftwaffe lost veteran pilots it could never replace. In the following months, German industry and morale began to crumble. Rail lines, oil refineries, and aircraft factories were pounded relentlessly. Even on the ground, P-51 strafed airfields and trains, destroying hundreds of aircraft before they could take off. Ace pilot George Preddy recalled, "They came up expecting easy meat, lumbering bombers and short-legged escorts. They didn't know we could follow them to their doorstep." The skies of Europe became the Mustang's proving ground. Its reputation, forged in high-altitude duels over Germany, would soon be exported across the Pacific, where distance, not numbers, was the enemy. From Europe to the Pacific. By mid-1944, Allied planners faced a different kind of war, one fought not across continents but across oceans. The B-29 Superfortress was America's hammer against Japan, capable of carrying 10 tons of bombs over 3,000 miles. Yet even the B-29 had limits. Its bases in the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were 1,500 miles from Tokyo. That meant 12-hour missions through violent jet streams and no fighter cover once they neared Japan. Japanese interceptors, the nimble K-43 Oscar, the tough K-84 Frank, and the high-flying J-2M Raiden could climb into position and pick off the bombers with impunity. Losses climbed. The air crews called it Black Monday, every time a formation limped home half-empty. So, just as the British had once turned to the Americans now turned to geography, and to an island that promised to change everything: Iwo Jima. General Hap Arnold, commanding the U.S. Army Air Forces, made it clear: take Iwo Jima, and the bombers will never fly alone again. The island lay halfway between the Marianas and Japan, a perfect emergency landing field for crippled B-29s, and an ideal fighter base. The cost would be staggering, but the payoff would break the Empire's last defense. The transfer orders. Even before the battle began, logistics officers were planning airstrip construction. Seabees and engineers studied aerial photos of Iwo Jima's volcanic terrain, sketching runways that would one day host Mustangs. Meanwhile, veteran P-51 groups in Europe were quietly reassigned for Pacific duty. Men of the 15th Fighter Group, veterans from Hawaii and the Central Pacific, received orders: prepare for long-range escort operations from advanced bases. Pilots from the 7th and 21st Fighter Squadrons packed up, shipped their beloved aircraft across the ocean, and waited as the Marines fought, yard by yard, to clear the black sands of Iwo Jima. By the time the last Japanese positions fell in late March 1945, those runways were ready. The same Mustangs that had hunted Messerschmitt Me-109s over Berlin would now hunt K-84s over Tokyo. Different sky, same mission. Go with the bombers, stay with the bombers. Closing moment of Section 2. March 1945. The first Mustangs stand lined along Iwo Jima's runway number 1, their wings streaked with volcanic dust. The pilots look east towards a homeland they've never seen but have sworn to destroy. Engines ignite one by one, the air rippling with the thunder of Merlins. The control tower flashes green. It's time to prove that the range of the Mustang is no longer measured in miles, but in the limits of imagination. March 4th, 1945. Iwo Jima Airfield, 0600 hours. The dawn sky is a bruised gray, streaked with ash from smoldering craters left by the last artillery duels. The air smells of wet sulfur and oil. Crews move like ghosts across the black sand, tightening bolts, checking oxygen lines, wiping grime from the wings of P-51 Mustangs lined in formation. Captain John Jack Cooper kneels beside his crew chief, checking the twin 110-gallon drop tanks that will carry him farther than any fighter in history. His aircraft, Nancy Lee, still bears the dust of last night's volcanic winds. On the side, his mechanic has chalked a crude outline of Japan, a silent challenge. Fuel checked, ammo loaded, oxygen topped, the crew chief mutters. "She'll get you there, Captain." Cooper looks up at the horizon, eastward where the Pacific fades into the haze. Somewhere beyond that endless gray lies Tokyo. For months, the bomber crews had flown alone into that sky, and many hadn't returned. Today, they won't be alone. Angels 27. At 0730, the roar of Wright R-3350 engines from the B-29 Superfortresses rolls across the island. The bombers of the 73rd Bomb Wing thunder overhead in long silver columns, each carrying nearly 6 tons of ordnance for the Musashino aircraft plant north of Tokyo. The P-51s, 108 of them, taxi into position behind the lumbering giants. Major Jim Tapp, leading the 78th Fighter Squadron, gives the order. "Mustangs, line up. Keep your tanks until rendezvous. We're flying the longest mission of this war." At 0745, the first wheels leave the ground. Volcanic dust whips into choking clouds as one after another the fighters lift off, banking east into the rising sun. The radio fills with chatter, part routine, part disbelief. "How's it look up there, Red Leader?" "Like flying into forever." Climbing through 15,000 feet, the island drops away, and for hours there is nothing but ocean. Beneath them, waves stretch unbroken to the horizon, the void between worlds. Pilots fight the creeping cold and the ache of fatigue. Every minute is a calculation: fuel, bearing, altitude. 600 miles from home, Cooper thinks, and we haven't even seen the enemy yet. Tokyo in sight. 5 hours after takeoff, Japan appears, a dark smudge on the horizon that grows into coastline, rivers, and rooftops glinting in the pale light. From this altitude, the capital looks deceptively calm. Then, ahead of the bombers, black puffs of anti-aircraft fire begin to blossom. The calm is over. "Bandits! 12 o'clock high! Multiple bogies climbing fast from Atsugi!" The call snaps every pilot awake. Japanese radar had tracked the incoming formation for nearly an hour, scrambling interceptors from bases around Tokyo Bay. K-84 Hayates, K-61 Tonys, and the nimble A-6M0s rise through the haze, sunlight flashing off their wings. There are dozens, maybe more. Major Jim Tapp's voice cuts through the static. "All flights, jettison tanks, engage at will." The silver drop tanks tumble away, catching the sun before vanishing into the clouds. Throttles slam forward. 600 American guns roar to life. The clash above the capital. At 27,000 feet, contrails weave into a chaotic tapestry, white ribbons twisting over Tokyo. Captain Cooper spots a Tony diving toward a bomber stream. He rolls inverted, drops his nose, and dives. The Merlin engine howls. The Mustang closes at almost 500 miles per hour, guns flickering. A burst, flashes of metal, then a plume of smoke as the Tony spirals down through the overcast. "Splash one!" The exultant shout crackles through the headset, then disappears in static. Below, the B-29s hold formation, black flak bursting among them. The smell of cordite and oil fills the cockpits. Defensive turrets swivel, spewing tracer arcs at attackers that dart in and out like hornets. Japanese pilot Lieutenant Kenji Arai, the same one who once doubted these Americans could reach Japan, locks onto a Mustang climbing ahead. He fires a burst, tracers ripping past the tail, but as he banks to follow, the Mustang suddenly climbs vertically, impossibly steep, loops over, and dives straight at him. "It's faster than anything we have!" Arai shouts to no one, slamming the stick forward. Too late. Cooper's guns flash again, and the K-84 disintegrates into a white streak of vapor and flame. For a heartbeat, there is only sky, empty, endless, and silent. The B-29s push through. At 11:30, the first Superfortresses reach Tokyo's industrial district. Bomb bay doors open, thousands of incendiaries cascade downward, trailing white smoke. The ground below disappears under a spreading curtain of fire. From altitude, the city looks like a map of glowing embers. The P-51s circle above, warding off attackers. Some Mustangs dive to strafe airfields at Chofu and Tachikawa, catching rows of aircraft on the ground. Machine gun tracers stitch through hangars, fuel trucks, and ammunition dumps. Tally-ho! Targets of opportunity on the field! Make 'em pay! For 2 hours, chaos reigns over the capital. Smoke rises 20,000 feet, blotting out the sun. Pilots fly by instrument alone, trusting their compasses as black ash coats their canopies. Then finally, the recall order comes. All elements, disengage, form up for return to base. The long ride home. Heading south, the formation stretches over the Pacific once more, fuel gauges sinking toward empty. Every vibration feels like a potential engine failure. The endless blue seems to mock their exhaustion. Lieutenant Paul Williams, barely 22, runs his fuel calculation for the 5th time. "We're cutting it close, Red Lead. 50 gallons left. Keep her leaned out, Red. We make it or we swim." Some won't. A few Mustangs damaged by flak or strained engines don't reach Iwo Jima. Pilots radio their last coordinates, then bail out over the sea. Rescue PBY Catalina later pick up survivors drifting in raft buck. Night of March 9th, 1945. Over Tokyo. The air is thick with smoke, the city below glowing like a dying furnace. In the faint moonlight, B-29s move in loose waves across the sky, their bomb bays yawning open. Inside, the bombardier's face is lit by the red glow of instruments as he steadies his voice into the intercom. Bombs away. 20,000 feet below, canisters of M69 napalm incendiaries tumble downward. When they hit, they burst into firestorms that leap across entire districts, wood, paper, and bamboo erupting in seconds. Streets vanish under sheets of flame. The temperature rises so fast it creates its own wind, drawing oxygen into the inferno. From the darkness above, P-51s circle at altitude, black silhouettes against the burning horizon. Their job isn't to bomb, but to guard. The Japanese air defense net has barely recovered from the escort raid 5 days earlier. Tonight, only a handful of interceptors rise to meet the intruders. Captain Jack Cooper, flying Nancy Lee, keeps his Mustang in a slow orbit, eyes straining through the smoke. "It's like watching the end of the world," he murmurs. His wingman says nothing. Below, Tokyo burns brighter than daylight. The Empire's failing wings. By March 1945, Japan's Air Defense Command was crumbling. Once, it had hundreds of fighters stationed across the home islands, organized into regional air divisions. But constant bombing, fuel shortages, and a lack of trained pilots had turned those units into hollow names. The 10th and 11th Sentai, once proud squadrons, now mustered a few dozen aircraft between them. New pilots, teenagers from the Yokaren Naval Aviator Schools, flew with only 30 hours of training. Fuel was rationed to a single test flight per day. Colonel Yoshio Shiga, who commanded the Atsugi Air Base Group, later recalled, We were fighting ghosts. They came from beyond our range, beyond our comprehension. Even if we destroyed one, 10 more appeared. Those ghosts were the P-51 Mustangs, now escorting B-29s almost daily. From Iwo Jima, they launched in rotating squadrons, flying deep into Japan's airspace, striking rail yards, airfields, and convoys along the Honshu coast. They weren't just escorts anymore. They were predators. The Tokyo Firestorm. The March 9-10 fire raid, Operation Meeting House, became the single deadliest air attack in history. Over 1,600 tons of incendiaries reduced 16 square miles of Tokyo to ash. Nearly 90,000 civilians were killed. Millions more were left homeless. Even Japanese army officers were stunned by the destruction. General Kawabe Torashiro, deputy chief of the Imperial General Staff, described it in his diary, "This is not war, it is annihilation." From Iwo Jima, the returning pilots of the 15th and 50th Fighter Groups reported the glow of Tokyo's fires visible over 700 miles away across the sea. The once invincible imperial capital had become a beacon of ruin. In the weeks that followed, more cities followed: Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama. Each raid met less and less resistance. Fighter bases stood empty, their fuel gone, their pilots reassigned to kamikaze units for the coming Okinawa campaign. The new mission: hunt the hunters. By April, the Mustang pilots' orders evolved. No longer limited to escorting bombers, they were authorized to sweep ahead, hunting enemy aircraft before they could even take off. April 7, 1945. At dawn, over Kisarazu Airfield, P-51s of the 78th Fighter Squadron dove out of the sun. Dozens of Japanese fighters sat lined on the ground, fueled and armed for takeoff. The first burst of .50 caliber fire turned the field into an inferno. "One pass, one field gone," Cooper later said. They never got off the runway. Similar attacks hit Tachikawa, Chofu, Hamada, and Kanoya. Entire squadrons were wiped out in their revetments. By May, Allied intelligence estimated Japan's operational fighter strength at fewer than 500 aircraft, down from over 5,000 2 years earlier. The balance of the skies had shifted so completely that bomber crews began to speak of a new kind of fear: emptiness. No interceptors, no radio chatter, just empty radar screens. Even victory at that altitude felt eerie. For Japanese civilians, the change was unmistakable. Where once air raid sirens had given time to flee, now attacks came with no warning. Mustangs roamed the skies by daylight, diving suddenly over rail yards and roads. Children in rural villages learned to hide at the sound of a distant roar. Teacher Kiyoko Tanaka, who lived near Hamamatsu, wrote in her diary, "We saw silver planes circling. They came down so low I could see the stars on their wings. Then they fired at the trains. The wind smelled like oil and smoke." It was the democratization of terror, no longer confined to front lines or factories. The war had entered every town, every field. The Mustangs were everywhere. The human cost on Iwo Jima was relentless but isolated. Pilots flew missions almost daily, each lasting up to 8 hours. Fatigue and dehydration became constant enemies. Volcanic dust choked engines, fouled weapons, and clung to every surface. Medical tents treated burns and oxygen injuries as often as bullet wounds. Lieutenant Charles Mac MacDonald wrote home to his wife in Iowa, "We live in the middle of a volcano, flying to the edge of the world every morning. The only thing worse than the heat is the silence when you're coming home with no gas left." By May, the 15th Fighter Group had lost over 70 aircraft to combat and mechanical failure, most to the sea. Rescue PBYs and submarines picked up those who ditched, but many were never found. Still, morale stayed high. Every pilot knew the strategic weight of what they were doing. Every sortie that reached Tokyo meant fewer American bombers lost, fewer airmen captured, and one step closer to ending the war. The dying breath of the Imperial Air Force. By summer 1945, Japanese air resistance had become fragmented and suicidal. Many of the nation's best pilots had perished years earlier over Rabaul, the Marianas, and the Philippines. Those who remained were ordered to form Tokotai, special attack units. The young men once destined to defend Japan's skies now climbed into aircraft with barely an hour's fuel, bound for one-way missions against U.S. ships near Okinawa. The contrast was brutal. While Japanese aviation turned inward toward death, the American Fighter Corps perfected the science of endurance, refueling, rotating, repairing, and flying day after day without pause. They died for honor, one Mustang pilot later said. We flew for survival. And survival, by 1945, meant domination of the air. Operation Iceberg, the skies over Okinawa, April to June 1945. While Iwo-based Mustangs guarded B-29s, carrier-based fighters and land squadrons fought the desperate kamikaze waves at Okinawa. Japanese pilots, stripped of radar and coordination, flew directly into naval gunfire and combat air patrols. B-51s rotated south to assist, strafing coastal airfields and intercepting suicide planes before they reached the fleet. The scale was staggering. 1,900 kamikaze sorties, over 350 ships damaged, yet many more intercepted by fighter patrols before impact. By the time Okinawa fell in late June, the Imperial Air Force was effectively extinct. Above Japan, the sky was empty. The Mustangs flew unchallenged. The silence after the storm. Summer 1945. From Iwo Jima's black slopes, the horizon seemed endless. The war's rhythm slowed. Missions became routine patrols, reconnaissance over the burned cities of Honshu, escorting the final bombing runs, even dropping leaflets warning of future attacks. Captain Cooper flew one such mission on July 25th, over Nagoya, now a wasteland of scorched steel. He circled once, saw no movement, and turned home. He wrote in his journal, "We've beaten them, but I don't feel like a winner." The P-51 had done its job too well. It had made Japan's vast empire feel smaller than the ocean that surrounded it. Closing moment of Section 4. August 6, 1945. Two P-51s from Iwo Jima, flying reconnaissance, pass above Hiroshima hours after dawn. From 30,000 feet, one pilot reports a flash on the horizon, brighter than any bomb they've ever seen. They don't yet know what it means, but in that moment, the age of the Mustang ends and a new kind of power takes its place. The sky that once burned with dogfights now burns with something beyond war. August 15, 1945. Iwo Jima Airfield. The air is still that morning, heavy with mist and the low hum of idling engines. Pilots linger by their aircraft, unsure whether to fly or wait. The loudspeakers crackle, hiss, then a calm voice from headquarters. Cease offensive operations. I repeat, cease all offensive operations. Japan has accepted unconditional surrender. For a few seconds, no one speaks. The men stare at one another, their faces expressionless under streaks of oil and ash. Then, as if on cue, someone laughs, another cheers. Worn-out airmen, veterans of months of raids, throw their caps into the air, and the sound that follows isn't triumph, it's exhaustion, breaking free. Captain Jack Cooper drops into the dirt beside his P-51, looks at the horizon, and lets out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. For the first time in years, there's nothing left to chase. The final flights. Over the next days, the Mustangs still fly, but not to fight. Reconnaissance patrols sweep over the blackened remains of Tokyo, Yokohama, and Nagoya, photographing what little is left. Others escort transport planes bringing relief supplies to starving civilians and downed airmen freed from prison camps. Major Jim Tapp records in his log, "Mission complete. No opposition, no flak, no contrails but our own." The air that had once bristled with death now feels hollow. Pilots describe it as flying through silence itself. No radio calls, no distant gunfire, only the steady hum of the Merlin engine echoing through their helmets. On the ground, the Seabees clean and widen Iwo's runways to receive an influx of C-54 transports. Thousands of American troops pass through on their way to occupy Japan. The island that once defined the edge of the empire now becomes a bridge to its heart. Crossing the line. August 28, 1945, at Sugi Air Base, Japan. The first Allied aircraft to land on Japanese soil are not bombers, but fighters. Mustangs from Iwo Jima, escorting General Douglas MacArthur's C-54 Bataan. They circle once above the airfield, wings flashing in sunlight, before peeling away as transports descend in neat formation. On the tarmac below, Japanese officers stand stiffly in formation, unarmed, eyes lowered. The same runways that once launched interceptors against B-29s now host the machines that broke their skies. Colonel Charles MacDonald, commander of the 475th Fighter Group, watches from his cockpit as he taxis past silent spectators. He later writes, "I thought about how many had died for these few strips of concrete, and how small it looked now. The war that spanned oceans ends on a single runway." Meeting the former enemy. Weeks later, Allied pilots meet their Japanese counterparts face-to-face for the first time. At Atsugi and Yokota, American officers supervise the disarming of remaining aircraft, rows of K-84s, Zeros, and Shiden lined wingtip to wingtip, propellers removed, guns safetied. Among the observers is Lieutenant Kenji Arai, the pilot who once saw his first Mustang streak past over Tokyo. He stands near the wreckage of his airfield, staring as American pilots walk among the grounded fighters. One of them, a tall blonde airman with an Iwo Jima patch, pauses, removes his gloves, and offers Arai a cigarette. For a moment, the two men share silence, smoke curling into the autumn air. They do not speak the same language, but both understand what it means to outlive a war. Later, Arai will write in his journal, "They flew faster, but it was not speed that defeated us. It was endurance." The return home. By October 1945, the squadrons begin rotating back to the United States. Mustangs are loaded onto carriers or flown to Guam for refitting. Pilots with exhausted eyes and months of sunburn board transports home. As the ships pull away from the Pacific Islands, the black volcanic beaches shrink to dots on the horizon. Cooper, now promoted to major, leans against the railing of the transport USS General Anderson and watches Iwo Jima fade from view. He remembers every takeoff, the engine screaming, the smoke, and the rising sun, and every empty seat at the mess tent that marked another pilot who didn't come back. We flew so far, and somehow The world feels even larger now. Back in America, crowds cheer their arrival. Bands play. Reporters ask about the miracle plane that could cross an ocean, but the pilots themselves are subdued. They've seen too much sky on fire to believe in miracles. The Mustang's legacy. The P-51 Mustang had entered the war as a design experiment, a British idea built in an American factory, and ended it as a symbol of global reach. In just 5 years, it had escorted bombers over Berlin, strafed convoys in Burma, and flown from volcanic ash to the skies of Tokyo. It was the first fighter that could go anywhere, do anything, and bring its pilot home. That combination, performance and endurance, became the blueprint for the modern era of aviation. Within months, engineers were already drawing blueprints for the next generation, jet aircraft like the P-80 Shooting Star and F-86 Sabre. But even those who would fly jets admitted something quietly. None ever felt like the Mustang. It was alive, said Chuck Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier. You strapped it on, and it became part of you. The pilots who stayed behind. Not everyone left the Pacific. Some Mustang groups remained as part of the Far East Air Forces, enforcing occupation airspace over Japan and Korea. They flew patrols over the shattered cities, mapping damage and photographing reconstruction. Others ferried supplies to POW camps or dropped food to civilians in remote villages. The enemy they once strafed now waved as they passed overhead. Captain Paul Williams, one of the youngest surviving pilots from Iwo, flew a low pass over Yokohama in December 1945 and wrote in his notebook, "The roofs are gone, but the people wave. Maybe that's the real victory." It was a quiet duty, almost monastic, guarding peace instead of waging war. Echoes of the past. In the years that followed, the Mustang silhouette became an icon of the victory it helped secure. Air shows across America displayed restored P-51Ds gleaming in polished aluminum. Veterans brought their children to see them, to hear that unmistakable growl of the Merlin engine one more time. At reunions, the old pilots told stories, not of glory, but of distance, of ocean crossings, of empty fuel gauges, of watching dawn rise over a world at war. Each story ended the same way, the realization that endurance, not aggression, had won the sky. In Tokyo, where RI once flew, rebuilt airports displayed captured Mustangs for study. Engineers measured every curve, every rivet, trying to understand the machine that had rewritten aerial warfare. Some would later design the first jets of the new Japan Air Self-Defense Force, inspired by the very aircraft that had defeated them. The sky grows quiet. 1946. Iwo Jima is nearly deserted now. The runways remain, but the tents are gone. Wind whips across the cratered plateau where so many planes once launched. A single Mustang, stripped for parts, rests near the old control tower. Its faded nose art barely visible. Nancy Lee. A maintenance crew tags it for salvage, but one sergeant pauses, running his hand along the wing. "Hell of a bird," he mutters. Then he walks away. The Pacific wind sighs through the empty cockpit, the echo of a machine that once carried men beyond the horizon. Epilogue. The long reach. Decades later, historians would call the P-51 Mustang the aircraft that shrank the world. It proved that air power wasn't just about speed or firepower, it was about reach. It allowed nations to project strength across oceans, to bring war or peace wherever needed. And for the Japanese pilots who once faced it, the memory remained vivid. Kenji Arai, in an interview before his death in 1987, smiled when asked what he thought of the Mustang. "When I saw it the first time, I thought it was impossible. When I saw it the last time, I knew the war was lost. But when I saw one again, years later, flying over Tokyo in peace, I thought it was beautiful." The sound of that engine, the deep rolling thunder of a Merlin, lingers in history, a reminder that the machines of war can also become symbols of endurance, courage, and reconciliation.